In the 1920s and early 30s, during the era of Prohibition, crime in the U.S. skyrocketed. Many cases had no witnesses or clear ties as criminals became smarter and more savvy. Murders were poorly investigated and went unsolved as law enforcement struggled to connect the dots. One possible resource, forensic science, was not yet a fully developed study and had many skeptics in the states. Because of this and other factors, the courts sent many innocent people to prison while guilty criminals walked. One man was determined to change this. His name was Edward Oscar Heinrich. He was a chemist who found a calling in solving crimes.
When forensics was in its nascent era, there was fingerprinting available, there were some toxicology, they were just beginning forensic geology, but really police officers leaned pretty heavily on confessions, and they, crossed their fingers for witnesses. And they also leaned on the third degree. So there weren't a lot of options for investigators during this time period until all of these forensic scientists started coming up with new tools, better ballistics, things like that. But it was a real struggle for investigators before they were able to team up with forensic scientists.
That's Kate Winkler Dawson, author of American Sherlock: Murder, Forensics, and the Birth of the American CSI. In short, forensic science is the scientific analysis of physical evidence at a crime scene.
Really, one of the most important things he did was he developed a technique for photographing using a dual microscope, two bullets at the same time. And this had not been done before. So he was able to photograph these two bullets side by side without sort of doing the 1920s version of photoshopping. And it created a hallmark case, and it's a technique that people use today.
It is important to note that some of the methods Heinrich used back then are not as common today. One example is handwriting analysis. Modern experts say a person's handwriting can change from year to year, even from day to day. Similar to handwriting is fingerprinting, which has also fallen out of favor.
Any of these techniques that are what they call pattern matching. So you have an analyst who picks up a piece of evidence like fingerprint, and they look at it and they say, oh, this definitively matches the fingerprint found on a suspect. Well, if you think about it, I just had to go to the DMV last year, and it took me 3 or 4 times with my fingerprint, with an expert there trying to get the fingerprint on the little machine to get it right. So the likelihood that we are going to be able to match somebody definitively is unlikely. And so fingerprinting has fallen under scrutiny. Bloodstain pattern analysis absolutely has. Footprint analysis has. But there were things that he also used that were really impressive. Forensic geology is really solid. Ballistics is really solid. Toxicology is solid. So you try different things, and I think the main point is Oscar believed in everything that he did. He had this never-ending confidence that I think was problematic.
A big downfall for Heinrich was that he could never admit when he made a mistake. This damaged his credibility and eventually led to the demise of his career. Even with modern technologies, Dawson says that errors still happen every day in the field. Take DNA testing, for instance.
Something like DNA analysis, we see that there have been problems with testing, with the way people test, with particularly how the samples have been stored, especially in the decades before really we understood DNA analysis and things were stored incorrectly or collected incorrectly. So I think as much as we would like some sort of a gold standard for forensic techniques, I think that they all need to be looked at very closely. And the National Academy of Sciences did that several years ago. They wrote a scathing report that really took a close look at all forensic techniques and gave us a list of all of the problems with the different techniques. And that's not to say that they shouldn't be used. They should just not be the sole piece of evidence against someone, particularly in a really, really serious case.
Scrutiny is important because it leads to improvement and stricter regulations in the industry. Dawson notes that forensic evidence often has such a profound effect on jurors because it's definitive when shown. Many juries now come to expect and rely on forensic evidence in order to reach a verdict. It's a well-known phenomenon known as the CSI effect, thanks to the TV show CSI, which was the most popular network series for years. Each week, viewers watched forensic experts collect evidence at a crime scene, analyze it in state-of-the-art labs, and catch the killer. It didn't matter if it was fictional. Today, some jurors come in assuming the same level of forensic evidence in court.
They expect it when they sit on a jury that they are going to be presented with a lot of evidence that's forensic, that's rock solid, that has been analyzed by a computer, that you see the fingerprints matching, and it's when you don't get that, and when a jury doesn't get that type of evidence, it makes it much more difficult to kind of get at the truth, because not a lot of cases have that. And I talked to a prosecutor one time who said, boy, she would rather have a circumstantial case than a case that relies on one forensic tool like DNA or fingerprinting, because with enough circumstantial evidence, it could be unbreakable, but with one forensic technique, a good defense attorney can break it down pretty easily. So I do think that juries really do expect a lot more than they may be offered in many cases.
Another issue with forensic evidence is the lack of a national standard for training, collection, and analysis. Because of this, each criminologist may interpret results differently. An expert practicing bloodstain analysis in Texas may reach a separate conclusion than one in New York.
So many of these things are the opinion of the analyst, and if the analyst is not good or not well trained or has a bad day or is just off, when you lean heavily on those techniques, then as a prosecutor or as a defense attorney, then you're doing a disservice.
Dawson believes that in many cases there must be an extra layer of evidence in addition to the forensic analysis in order to reach a fair and just verdict.
I think it's dangerous when you are looking to convict someone, particularly in a capital case, on forensic techniques that need to be evaluated more. And that happens so often today. In some ways, they want to, catch criminals, and everybody wants that. But in order to make society safer and fairer, we absolutely have to scrutinize these tools much more.
As a career criminologist, Heinrich took part in more than 2,000 cases and helped solve around 1,000. Looking past innovation in the lab, he also had a knack for dissecting a crime scene and finding key details that others missed.
Most forensic scientists in the 1920s were very haphazard with the way they recorded their data and what they did and where they put it and how they stored it, and he really set a high standard. He was so meticulous, and I think probably obsessive-compulsive disorder for sure, that he was able to collect all of these things and keep them straight and organized in a way that allowed him to then go back and reevaluate, this crime scene and reevaluate the crime. And his attention to detail is something I've never quite seen with anybody else. So I think that all of these techniques, particularly the one you're talking about, being, highly organized and using certain containers, and he labeled everything, and I started recognizing a pattern in the way that he was recording things in his journals that allowed him to go back and really easily reference all of this material. And then he would always type up this incredibly detailed sort of memo to the district attorneys or whoever had hired him that really laid out the case very, very well. And that's why he was so popular. That's why he was hired all the time.
Many of Edward Oscar Heinrich's methods are still taught today. You can read the fascinating details of many of the cases he cracked in Kate Winkler Dawson's new book, American Sherlock: Murder, Forensics, and the Birth of the American CSI, available now online and in bookstores. You can learn more about all of our past guests by visiting our website at viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, search Viewpoints Radio on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. This segment was written and produced by Polly Hansen. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our studio engineer is Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
Did you know 1 in 4 small businesses will close due to cash flow difficulties or lack of access to capital? But they don't have to. According to Lauren Schifrin of Revolution Capital, the country's leading provider of factoring and cash flow financing, there's a safe and easy way to access your capital immediately without hurting your bottom line.
It's called factoring. We buy your invoices and pay you same day. That provides you with the immediate liquidity and access to the capital you need to grow your business. Because now more than ever, companies should have a finance partner that's on their side.
Revolution Capital provides flexible funding options to small to medium-sized businesses that would like immediate access to capital, and they respect your business relationships to help you succeed and grow. Find out more at revinc.com. That's REVINC.com.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows. And find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints. Coming up next week.
Europa's ocean might harbor complex life, and that's probably the only place in the solar system where you can say that.
The journey to Jupiter's icy moon Europa and why it matters. Then,
we have this mentality in our classroom that we're all in this together, no matter what it is, whether it's math class or whatever's going on in the world.
The benefits of learning back in person. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.